I think we made the same mistake that every other indie studio does. We released our first game, everything went really well, we were really euphoric about it, and then we had a handful of false starts and other projects, spun a bunch of them up, wound a bunch of them down, overscoped a bunch, burnt out, and then disappeared for a long time. But I'm really, really glad to say that we're finally ready to show our next title. We've called it VOIDSWARM. So, what is it? Well, VOIDSWARM is a spacefaring roguelike RTS where you play the dual role of combat pilot and fleet commander to overcome an endless alien horde. It's a love letter to players who love space travel and the hard sci-fi mechanics, like in shows like The Expanse, or in games like Outer Wilds, and it's also for players who miss old school RTS games that prioritise player freedom and fun over optimisation and following the meta. We have just announced and launched the Steam page for VOIDSWARM, and this is obviously the first in a series of devlogs that we're planning to make for it, so if you want to follow along with the journey, please like and subscribe to the channel. We'll post more in the future. And if you're interested at all in actually playing the game, please give us a wish list on Steam. I've got the link down in the description below. We'd been umming and ahhing for quite a while whether to do a devlog. We worried about it being too much of a burden on a small development team. So we've decided to do it, but only with the caveat that we're doing it really for ourselves so that we can sort of look back on the development of the game and see how far we've come, because we find that really motivating. But hopefully it's interesting to everyone else out there as well. VOIDSWARM is the culmination of a lot of starts and stops in game development, and actually the bones of the game predate our first released title, which was Happy Hour Hero, which was for VR headsets. And it predates it by a couple of years, but the version of the game that we started with is nothing like what we're looking to ship today. Initially, the project internally was called NIMBY, as in not in my backyard, and it was a side-scrolling shooter in the vein of the R-type games. We were using it as a way to learn about how to build games in Unity, and we thought this is a really interesting genre, it's pretty underserved, and we had a lot of good memories of it from childhood, so we thought we would make something in that vein. We built a good foundation for that whole project, so we got like the overworld working, we got a couple of example levels into the game, we built out some weapons, we built out some enemies, and some of the tooling that we needed to do that, and then realised that to build out the full game, we would need a huge amount of artwork, and at that point in time, that was our particular downfall. It took us 10 times as long to produce one piece of artwork than it would to implement pretty much everything else in a given level of the game, so we decided to spin down that project in favour of a smaller scope project, which is how we ended up with Happy Hour Hero, which is a really small sort of arcade style VR game where you play as a bartender in a really busy bar. And there was a bunch of other mini games around it, like we had a bowling mini game where you were knocking down empty glass bottles, we had a darts mini game, things like that were just really small and easy to manage. That game on its own took us a year of development to really figure everything out, to optimize it for the Quest 2 headset, to try and actually make it fun, to try and debug the whole thing, even for a tiny game like this. The amount of bugs that crop up in development is staggering, and for every week of development that you do where you feel like you're making progress, it adds on like another 3 or 4 days of debugging sometimes. So that took a lot longer than we thought it would, but we were really, really happy with the finished product. Rather than learn the lesson about staying small scope, what we actually took from Happy Hour Hero was that we could release a game, and that was really empowering. So we spun up a bunch of other projects. Those, I think, were actually really promising, and we're probably going to go back to one day in some form or another. But they were wildly overscoped, as it turns out. This is something that we apparently just didn't learn from the year-long development of Happy Hour Hero. And so we decided to wind those down and sort of go back to the drawing boards for a little bit. Initially, really, that looked like burnout. So we spent a couple of months away, just sort of recovering for a little bit, and then I got the itch to do game dev again, wanted to learn something kind of new in there. So I ended up learning, I won't go into the details for people that aren't technically minded, but a piece of technology in the Unity engine called the Data-Oriented Tech Stack, or DOTS, and the sort of accompanying ECS system. And the long and the short of it is that this is a system that's really highly optimized to have loads of different entities on the screen, thousands and thousands of entities, but it requires that you sort of program in a different way. And that was really interesting to me, so I used it as a way to learn something new and slowly get back into game dev. As a way to make that really interesting for myself, I actually used the old NIMBY project as a base. I took the overworld section for the game and thought, well, what if I could add, I don't know, a few hundred, a few thousand ships and have them all sort of autopilot around? That would be like a great use case for this type of technology and this way of coding. If I could get a huge number of these entities all sort of independently navigating around a scene. So I spent a while building that out. That actually went really well. It took a little while to get it all sort of working together, but I really enjoyed the learning process. I really enjoyed the way that it actually forces you to code to make it really performant. And then I realized fairly quickly that having thousands of spaceships on screen felt like the start of something. It felt like the start of this game where you had these huge space battles where you'd be traversing these huge spaces. And that was really the seed of what's become VOIDSWARM now. It tickled something in my brain and it made me think of when I was a kid and I used to play Command & Conquer Generals all the time. My favourite thing in that game was to play as the Chinese side, build up huge base defences so that I could have all the time in the world to build this huge army of tank hunters and then just send them en masse out into the battlefield and watch them absolutely decimate everything in their path. I used to love doing that, and I realised with what I was building that I could make a game that sort of scratches the same itch. So I sort of took a few notes from that game. I thought, what if you could build these armies of hundreds of units? What if you could command them around the battlefield? And actually, what if you had an enemy that appeared in the same sort of number? Borrowing from obvious inspirations like Vampire Survivors, where like a huge part of the fantasy is overcoming just an absolutely gargantuan number of enemies. I also remember waiting for the day that they would make a Command & Conquer game where you could play as one of the units, and that obviously didn't happen with Command & Conquer Generals, but it did happen in a small game series called Toy Soldiers. I absolutely loved that, so I wanted to incorporate that into this game too. So we took this idea around having this space RTS game and tried to figure out how we would make a full game around it. We wanted to avoid all of those pitfalls with overscoping that we'd seen in the other projects that we'd been making and with the original version of this game, NIMBY, that we ran into. We realised that space is actually really good for roguelikes because it means that you only have to make a sort of fairly minimal amount of art. You can travel to different solar systems and have wildly different battles each time using a sort of clever procedural generation system. And really, we've spent the last several months making those gameplay loops fit together to make sure that you can actually merge the RTS gameplay with a roguelike game loop, and we think we've started to crack it now. So we're really looking forward to going over the design choices that we've made and the iterations of the game that we've been through over the next several devlogs. But for a devlog 0, I think I've sort of set the scene of what we're building. Like I said at the top of the video, if you're at all interested in following along with the journey, please like and subscribe to the channel. We'll post more devlogs in the near future. And if the game sounds remotely interesting to you, a wishlist on Steam would go a really, really long way for us. So I've dropped the link to the Steam page in the description below. In the meantime, please enjoy the teaser trailer for VOIDSWARM.